Yo, it's fucking shitty. It's fucking hell. Like, constantly fighting, constantly.
Some of them don't give a fuck about you, some of them do. But I want to go to one that at least like respect me, I mean, and go help me out with my arms, like, other than that.
What's your current living arrangements?
Homeless.
You're homeless?
I still think about that night in downtown Los Angeles. The city lights were so blinding you'd think they could hide anything, except the silence. A man was sitting on the curb, wrapped in a worn-out coat with someone else's name still stitched on the pocket. He wasn't asking for money. He didn't even look up. He just stared at the sky, like it belonged to a world he wasn't part of anymore. I asked where he'd come from. He said, Mississippi. Though I guess it doesn't matter now. And right then it hit me. In this country, the place you're born and the color of your skin can still shape how close you get to having a home, or how fast you lose one.
There's a lot of miserable people out here. A lot of people are miserable and depressed. They don't have anybody no more.
Mm-hmm.
They burnt a lot of bridges. And there's also a lot of mentally ill people out here too that should not be out here, that don't get high or anything and just living out here. So it makes it even more dangerous and, stressful.
We love to talk about freedom, about working hard, about opportunity, about that big American dream. But walking those streets at night, you start to see where that promise cracks. You realize that what some call bad choices or bad luck is often the same old story repeating itself, just falling on someone new. People label it poverty. Some blame addiction. But underneath it all, it's a story about race, about who gets another shot and who gets pushed aside. And isn't it strange that in the wealthiest nation on earth, thousands still lay their heads under freeway bridges, their tents glowing faintly beneath the same skyline as billion-dollar towers? According to the National Alliance to End Homelessness 2025, Black Americans make up only about 13% of the country's population, yet they represent more than 40% of people experiencing homelessness. Their homelessness rate is almost 4 times the national average, roughly 63 out of every 10,000 people, compared to 17 per 10,000 nationwide. That's not just a number. It's the long shadow of redlining, biased lending, and rental doors quietly closed before they even opened. And the February Housing Up report added another painful layer. 64% of all people experiencing homelessness are Black or Hispanic. Makes you stop and think, doesn't it? How a nation this powerful still allows these inequities to linger, twisting the American dream into something unrecognizable for millions. In this article, we're going to dive into that history, look at how it still shapes today's reality, especially with homelessness rising 18% this year. Break down the economic and social fallout, and then map out real solutions that could turn the tide. But the question that hangs over all of it is this: Can America ever call itself fair if we keep ignoring this red thread tying yesterday's discrimination to tomorrow's outcomes? This article is meant strictly for education and awareness. It doesn't aim to criticize, defend, or promote any group, race, or political side. Its purpose is simple: to inspire understanding, compassion, and honest conversation about the challenges facing communities across the United States.
It's hard, you know, you wake up, you basically got to move around constantly because you got security and the cops. Basically, like, all day you're moving. They're moving us out, moving us around, telling us we can't be here, can't be there. And then, you know, you got still regular people that live here.
The historical roots of racial injustice in American housing. From the cotton fields of the South to the divided neighborhoods of the North, Black Americans were shut out of every opportunity to build wealth through land and home ownership, a deliberate barrier that still echoes loudly today. How can a nation promise opportunity when its foundation was built on denying that very opportunity to entire communities? Racial segregation didn't disappear with Brown v. Board in 1954. It simply slipped into housing policies that packed Black families into aging, neglected buildings, while white suburbs thrived on government-backed loans. Any honest documentary on homelessness has to follow the trail back to redlining, because that's where the American dream began to fracture. Redlining, that notorious practice pushed by the Federal Housing Administration in the 30s and 40s, stamped Black and brown neighborhoods as high risk, cutting them off from mortgages, insurance, and the chance to build stability. And even now, according to All Home, 45% of Black Americans say they experienced discrimination when trying to rent or buy a home in 2025. These aren't just statistics. They're stories of families turned away, hopes pushed aside, and doors closed before anyone could knock. The truth is, the stains on those old redlined maps have never fully washed away. Redlining in America wasn't just a policy. It was a quiet promise that some families would always start life far behind the rest. And tied directly to homeless in America, that legacy isn't a forgotten chapter. It's the spark behind today's evictions, shelters filled to the brim, and tent communities rising across the nation. Families who were able to secure safe, affordable mortgages saw their kids attend stronger schools, while families locked out of fair credit ended up renting in overlooked neighborhoods, places more vulnerable to eviction and with little chance to build real, lasting wealth. When rents rise faster than wages, who gets knocked down first? Usually the working folks without a financial safety net. And among them, Black, Indigenous, and Latinx families fall hardest and fastest. How can anyone call it fair when the starting line has been tilted for generations? In the past few years, the housing market has gone white hot, and affordable homes, the ones regular people can actually manage, have slipped farther and farther away. And those old redlined neighborhoods? Now they're being swept up by gentrification, that polished revitalization that pushes longtime residents right out. Rents shoot up, property taxes spike, and families are shoved to the margins or straight into homelessness. That's no accident. That's structural racism, baked-in inequality wearing an economic mask. And when you start noticing new tents popping up along the sidewalks, it usually means something happened just out of view. A no-cause eviction, a sudden rent spike that hit like a punch, or a credit score wrecked over a couple of unpaid medical bills. Those black marks might disappear on paper, but in America's racial system, they never completely fade. Some people say, but we have anti-discrimination laws now, right? And yes, we do, and they matter. They're progress. They're a foothold. But no law can magically restore decades of lost equity. The wealth drained from generation after generation that left families with nothing to pass on except struggle. And that's the long, steep slide so many people of color have faced, quietly, worn down, and far too heartbreakingly often. When racism becomes a structure. Sometimes I honestly wonder if America even sees how deep its own barriers go. We love to talk about equality, freedom, and fresh starts. Yet almost every system we build carries the fingerprints of old prejudice we never fully scrubbed clean. Racism today isn't always shouted. Most of the time it shows up quietly in housing rules, loan approvals, zoning boards, arrest records. The issue isn't just in what people say anymore. It's in what the system keeps doing. Just look at the latest numbers. The 2025 report from the National Homelessness Law Center shows that people of color, especially Black Americans and Native communities, are far more likely to be ticketed, arrested, or hassled simply for trying to survive outside. Think about that. When a white person sleeps in a park, folks call it hard times. When a Black person does it, suddenly it's suspicious. Same situation, different judgment. Doesn't that tell you justice is blind has always been more slogan than reality? And it's not just about bias in the public's eyes. The 2025 Justice Department review of policing in Phoenix found a clear pattern. Officers consistently treated unhoused people differently based on race. Black and Latino individuals faced more aggressive stops, more searches, and a higher chance of violence. These aren't random incidents, they're repeated trends. You see them again in Los Angeles, in Houston, in Atlanta. They're the reason the term structural racism hits so hard. It's not one hateful person causing harm. It's an entire system that keeps producing unequal outcomes, even when no one openly claims to be prejudiced. When I walk through downtown Los Angeles and see those tents lined up along the sidewalks, most of the faces staring back at me are Black or brown. They all share the same story, even if they say it differently. They didn't just lose a place to live. They lost the basic right to be treated like people. One man told me, "This isn't just poverty, it's punishment." And those words have stayed with me, because that's exactly what homeless in America often becomes. A sentence handed down simply for being born on the wrong side of our country's history. So ask yourself this: if skin color still influences who finds a stable home and who ends up ticketed or pushed out, what kind of freedom are we really claiming? And how do we fight homelessness without tearing apart the quiet machinery that keeps certain groups locked out from the start? The truth is, racism in America didn't disappear. It adapted. It puts on a suit, walks into city council meetings, and signs laws that criminalize sleeping outside, handing out food, or just existing while being poor and not white. It's subtle, official, and relentless. Until we confront that, these streets, those long rows of tense and exhausted faces, will keep giving us the same warning. Racism doesn't fade on its own. It just finds a new place to live. The impact of racial discrimination on homelessness through a socioeconomic lens. You ever stop and really sit with this, friend? How racism isn't just hiding in back rooms or whispered behind closed doors. It's the constant pressure that pushes people, especially Black and brown families, closer and closer to homelessness every single day. start with the economy. Everyone knows wage gaps built from decades of hiring bias keep opportunity out of reach. Pew Research reported in May 2025 that 75% of Black Americans say they've faced discrimination at work, turning what should be dependable income into a daily struggle just to keep afloat. And when cuts hit, like the federal food assistance reductions we saw rolling in this fall, they land hardest on Black households, wiping out the little cushion that stands between them and eviction. Add to that the findings from the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, shared in March 2025. Black Americans face nearly 4 times the risk of homelessness compared to white families. By mid-October, the latest numbers showed rates reaching 63 per 10,000 in Black communities. It breaks your heart, doesn't it? You imagine a single mother juggling 2 jobs, still one late rent payment away from losing everything. And you have to ask, how long can we pretend this merit-based system isn't built on old, poisonous assumptions? And when you zoom out, the damage runs even deeper. Roots tangled in soil tainted long before today. Homelessness in America isn't just about empty wallets. It's a force that steals health, dignity, and future chances, magnifying every inequality racism has planted over generations. The NIH's groundbreaking study, released just a few days ago in early November 2025, ties structural racism directly to these widening health gaps. Black individuals facing eviction or shelter life show soaring rates of chronic stress, diabetes, and heart disease, numbers that outpace white counterparts by margins that practically shout neglect. And Oxford Academic's September review hammers the point home. Black Americans are only 13% of the population, yet shoulder the greatest homelessness risks. Housing Up's February findings echo it too. 64% of unsheltered people are Black or Hispanic. Here's a question that tends to stir debate at any diner counter. What if we finally admitted that throwing billions into colorblind shelter systems without addressing the ghosts of redlining is just another way of keeping the cycle alive, letting the suburbs prosper while the urban core crumbles? A bold claim, sure, but maybe it's time we stopped dodging that uncomfortable truth. Racial injustice isn't locked away in the history books. It shows up in who gets pushed out, who gets overlooked, and who ends up sleeping outside tonight. When you connect the dots, these economic blows and social wounds don't happen separately. They're forged by policies that, if we chose to, we could change. Project 2025's proposal, splashed across the New York Times on November 2nd, threatens to roll back key anti-discrimination protections and even eliminate race-based data tracking, the very tools that reveal these inequalities. Without that lens, homeless in America becomes an invisible crisis for those already suffering the most. And on X, voices like Andy68580664 were calling it economic genocide in late October, pointing to places like Georgia, where Black poverty flows straight into tent encampments. Meanwhile, Arctotherium 42 complains about the cost of the bottom rung in social housing, missing the truth that those dollars barely bandage wounds caused by deep structural bias. So I ask you, from one old hand to another, if this is really the land of the free, why do invisible chains still keep so many anchored to the streets? As the night. You know, when I sit back and think about this endless loop where racism feeds straight into homelessness, people sleeping on rain-soaked concrete, their struggles written in every tired wrinkle, it hits you deep, doesn't it? The truth is, the solutions we need aren't dreamy fantasies. They're real, Practical steps that'll take some sweat and some backbone. Just look at the warning Johns Hopkins sounded back in August. The strongest move we can make is keeping people housed before they fall. Invest serious money into affordable rentals that don't punish people based on their neighborhood or the color of their skin. The U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness has been shouting this for years. Expand access to rental vouchers, enforce fair housing protections, and stop discrimination that slips in quietly. And with the Justice Department's new rules from July, we're talking about real accountability. Rules that put pressure on landlords who try to pull racist tricks. Picture the impact. Fewer evictions in Black and brown communities, where rent spikes already push homelessness rates up fourfold, according to that painful report from last month. But what if we took it a step further? Tie federal housing dollars to strict anti-bias checks, so every subsidized home becomes a shield against inequality. Then there's the community side, the heartbeat of all of this. The part where it's just you and me, talking like old friends over coffee. We need education that doesn't just lecture, but really reaches people. Workshops in churches, rec centers, neighborhood halls, showing how redlining's ghosts still shape today's homeless in America crisis, where 64% of people outside are Black or Hispanic, as Housing Up exposed earlier this year. Legal aid centers, powered by fired-up pro bono attorneys, could help families push back against predatory lenders waiting to pounce on the vulnerable. It's about building networks that don't break, the kind that say, "You're not fighting this battle alone." But here's where the road gets rough, and I'll say it straight because someone has to. Those grassroots efforts, they're incredible. But without real funding from the top, they're always fighting uphill. Flip the coin though, and the obstacles rise like storm clouds, heavy and unyielding. Project 2025's plan? It's a blow to fair housing, gutting oversight, weakening access, and cutting off the racial data that shows exactly where the disparities are, leaving Black neighborhoods even more vulnerable, just as the Thurgood Marshall Institute warned. And then comes the backlash, the loud cry of reverse racism you hear all over X, from voices like Texas Bell saying white families get pushed aside while minorities get special treatment. You see the problem? It turns real solutions into political battlefields. And here's an idea that'll rattle some cages. Maybe it's time we stop pretending race no longer matters. Because acting like everything's equal now is just another way of propping up the same old inequalities we claim we want to erase. The State of Homelessness report that came out in September showed a brutal record. 771,000 people without a home, with resources spread thinner than we've ever seen. So tell me, friend, how long do we let politics freeze progress before we stand up and demand something better for every one of us? It's a long reckoning, slow and sobering, but every honest step forward is worth it.